As Donald Trump tries to cover up just how disastrous this war in Iran is, he just got some really bad news. He suffered a big loss in federal court in Washington, D.C., where a federal judge has now voided the Pentagon's new press policy, which was what caused most news outlets to surrender their press credentials. It was a lawsuit brought by the New York Times, as Josh Gerstein reports, and federal judge Paul Friedman, a Clinton appointee, says that the new Pentagon policy violates the First Amendment because it is designed to weed out disfavored journalists. And specifically, the Pentagon policy required journalists to sign off on the Pentagon rules, which basically said that anytime there's a report, the Pentagon needs to review what's being published before it's published, which no credible journalist would sign. So you ended up getting all of these like right-wing, sycophantic, ridiculous propagandists who were the only ones who wanted to stay in the Pentagon or go into the Pentagon, whereas, all of the kind of legacy and other journalists, lots of people who have covered the Pentagon for a very long time, oftentimes people on the Pentagon beat have done that for decades. They all said, look, there's no way that we're going to agree to this. And even like Fox said, no way. The Journal said, no way. New York Times, Washington Post, and, anybody else who has really done a good Pentagon beat. And by the way, the Pentagon reporters are often really good reporters. Like even Fox, which I call state regime media, their Pentagon reporters are usually first class. Same thing with CBS and CNN and ABC. And I'm often critical of a lot of the people on these networks, but usually their Pentagon people are really, really good because the subject matter is so serious. And, usually you wouldn't get into all these kind of partisan political issues when you're talking about war and peace, of course, obviously, until the Trump regime tried to turn this into the Soviet Union. Let me show you what the federal judge wrote in this order. I think it's important. It starts off with just a reminder of the First Amendment. A primary purpose of the First Amendment is to enable the press to publish what it will and the public to read what it chooses, free of any official prescriptions. Those who drafted the First Amendment believe that the nation's security requires a free press and an informed people, and that such security is endangered by governmental suppression of political speech. That principle has preserved the nation's security for almost 250 years. It must not be abandoned now. As the Supreme Court said 50 years ago in the Nebraska Press Association case, we have learned and continued to learn from what we view as the unhappy experiences of other nations where government has been allowed to meddle in the internal editorial affairs of newspapers. Regardless of how beneficent sounding the purpose of controlling the press might be, we remain intensely skeptical about those measures that would allow the government to insinuate itself into the editorial rooms of this nation's press. Then it goes on to talk about how this lawsuit was initiated by the New York Times and its reporter Julian Barnes. They brought this lawsuit to preserve and defend these principles against the overzealous actions of Pete Hegseth and the department he leads. They filed what's called a summary judgment motion, saying that there's no disputed facts, rule in our favor, and let us basically have our credentials back and declare this rule by the Pentagon unconstitutional and allow us to report on the war and allow us to report accurately about what's happening in the Pentagon. And the court said, yes, you can report what's accurately, and these rules by Pete Hegseth are unlawful. The court explains that this case centered around what's referred to as Pentagon Facility Alternate Credentials, PFACSs. And because you're dealing with national security issues, sensitivity around what's going on in the Pentagon, in theory, these PFACSs are supposed to be kind of just limitations that are very limited in use. But Hegseth and the Trump regime, the way they try to utilize all these other things to clamp down on our constitutional rights, they use these PFACSs or these PFACs as ways to do that. And so they started off by doing a PFAC that was like, okay, well, you can't go near where Pete Hegseth's office is. Then they were like, okay, well, you can't go near this perimeter. Then it was like, okay, if you want to attend they kept on going and going and going. Okay, if you want to attend the press briefings, you now have to agree to this. Then it's like, if you want to have your credentials in the first place, if you want a PFAC in the first place, you have to agree to our rules. And our rules say we need to have essentially at the Pentagon editorial control over what you write about us. Or otherwise you need to hand in your credentials. And so what Hegseth and what the Pentagon was trying to do is kind of be cute with it. Look, we never fired them. We never told them they can't show up. All we had to say is you have to agree to our rules. And they don't want to agree to our rules. And so if they don't agree to our rules, they're the ones who voluntarily left. But obviously the rules were the pretext. The rules were the subterfuge in order to make sure that that the press doesn't show up because nobody would agree to it. And that's exactly what the federal judge said. I want to bring in Harry Litman from the Talking Feds YouTube channel, podcast, and Substack. Everybody subscribe there to the Talking Feds. Now, Harry, this is an important ruling, especially right now with all of the horrific things happening in this disastrous war that Donald Trump has launched unlawfully in Iran. We need reporters who can cover this thing and explain what's really happening. At these Hegseth press briefings, it's all like Mike Lindell's media company and like groups like that, because there's really no other media that's allowed to kind of be around there. But walk us through this ruling, Harry, and why I think this is a really significant ruling, and the timing of it's very significant.
Yeah, it is important, man. And as you say, Judge Friedman at the end goes through current events and why the general principle is of paramount importance now that we are at war. Look, what the administration tried to do is a gambit they do in many different settings. They use or exploit the mantra of national security or emergency to try to completely control the viewpoint and what people write. In other words, make it sound as if it's somehow either neutral or in support of national security, but was really going on, and Judge Friedman really adroitly ferrets this out, is trying to control content. We know, by the way, about this Department of Defense. Just last week, they told photographers they couldn't show up because they don't like the pictures they took of Hegseth. It's a similar kind of idea, except in much more serious content. So what they said is, well, here are our rules, and there were several of them, and among them was this: hey, department employees aren't allowed to disclose anything. So if people from the press receive those any kind of disclosures from people at the Defense Department, that's participating in a crime. All we're saying is you have to adhere to the law. But that, of course, is centrally directed toward what reporters do every day: develop sources and get information. Likewise, what Friedman makes clear is that they are selective. They took these very ambiguous and somewhat benign, not benign really, but premised in security. But they were so vague that A, they violated the Fifth Amendment, that the due process clause, you can't be vague. But B, they were applying them to favor the reporters who were saying the right kind of stuff, and disfavor there were those reporters that turned out under this ambiguous policy, oh, you're violating it. So it really was, subterfuge is not too strong a word for what they were doing, using it to control the content of reporting on the Defense Department, exactly what autocracies and dictatorships do and not what democracies do. Now, Friedman is I actually, way back in the day, vetted him for the court. He was a real sort of pillar of the bar, and he's a scholarly, very well-respected judge, and he just really takes a scalpel to this and explains why the policy, though in its terms, and again, this is the common trope of the Trump administration, framed in terms of national security. And, look, of course, you can tell a reporter you want to report here. You can't, sneak into the room and ferret through the files. But they're using the general principle to apply to basically what you report on and using it to discriminate against certain viewpoints, precisely what a free press is designed to prevent. And as you say, Friedman ends with and he actually quotes himself from the bench. I think he liked how he put it in the hearing, saying, now more than ever, it's essential for the American people to understand what's going on lawfully, and lawfully means here as it's always been. That's the other point, again, that you see in the administration. They took a regime that always had been viewpoint neutral, and they imposed all these new rules that, when you really get down to it, were ways to try to control the content of what reporters write. And it's no surprise, this is who Hegseth is. This is who the Defense Department is. Hegseth bitterly complained from the time of his nomination that certain reporters were unfair, meaning critical of him. That's the price you pay for being defense secretary, and they want not to pay it. And what Friedman was able to really do with a careful and meticulous analysis was to show what they were up to here, what the subterfuge was, which is to control the content of what reporters of the Defense Department were giving to the American people. Strict and straightforward violation of the First Amendment.
Harry Litman always breaking it down perfectly. I think, again, we need right now the best reporters out there to cover what's happening in Iran. I mean, of course, in war, we're used to propaganda. We expect that, however, this is next level lies, and the frantic pace of the lies, going back and forth, different justifications, different numbers, different everything. I mean, just even Donald Trump saying Iran's been totally obliterated. At the same time, you'll see Iranian drones hitting Qatari oil facilities and Saudi oil facilities and the Haifa oil facility. It's like, okay, well, I think it was The Economist who said, well, if you claim you destroyed 100% of the military capabilities of Iran, that 0% is sure creating a lot of havoc globally right now, because, there's a lot going on there. And we just need truthful information. We really do. Because, this is, the absurdity of the Trump, all that crap. When we're dealing with stuff like this, it should really, regardless of your political party, make you say enough is enough, Harry.
And one quick point to add to that, but you're exactly right. And what do reporters, professional good reporters like Julian Barnes do? They develop sources. That's you might call it the kind of dirty secret of how journalists work. But of course, you get the conventional word from on high, and if you're a reporter worth her or his salt, you'll dig and you'll find what's actually going on and report it to the American people. And that's a service, and the way you do that is by knowing people on the inside. That's the sort of currency that reporters work under, and it's always been the ire and chagrin of heads of agencies that these people exist and talk to reporters, but that is the way they work. So when Hegseth says, if you must agree as a condition of having your gold pass here, never to talk to or get unauthorized admissions from people in the department, that's just saying, put both your hands behind your back and throw away your pen, because that's how the American people learn things. It's through what agency heads would say, sources who are not supposed to give, and they do. That's the way it works.
Everybody, make sure you subscribe to the Talking Feds YouTube channel, Talking Feds podcast, Talking Feds Substack. It's where I get my legal news from that guy right there, that handsome fella, Harry Litman. Thanks, Harry.
Hey, thank you, Ben. I like your tan.
Everybody hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.